Imagine two different people.
Right.
They both walk into the exact same clinic, sit in the exact same chair, and listen to a doctor say the exact same words.
And those words are usually something like, you have a developmental disorder.
Exactly. Just a very clinical, factual statement.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. The first person leaves that clinic feeling just, well, a heavy, crushing disappointment.
Right. It feels like a judge just handed down a life sentence or something.
Yeah. But then the second person hears those identical words, and their reaction is entirely different. They experience this sudden, immense lightness of heart.
Like a massive weight has just been lifted off them.
You can physically see the tension drain out of their shoulders. Same words, same diagnosis, but two entirely opposite realities.
Which is fascinating because it forces us to ask a really critical question. I mean, if the medical categorization is entirely neutral.
Which it is, right?
Exactly, it is. It's just a descriptor of a neurobiological state. So the diagnosis itself isn't the actual source of the suffering or the relief.
Right. The words themselves don't hold that power.
No, the reaction is being generated by the psychological scaffolding the patient has built up around their life before they ever walked into that room.
And that perfectly sets the stage for what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. We are so glad you were here with us.
Absolutely.
Today, we're tearing into a short but honestly incredibly dense piece of writing from a Japanese publication called Diamond Online.
Yeah, it's penned by a fascinating figure known as psychiatrist Tomy.
Right, and the piece is titled, When Diagnosed with a Developmental Disorder, What You Should Focus On Before the Disease Name.
And, you know, the brevity of this source text is kind of deceptive.
Oh, totally. You read it in a couple of minutes, but then...
Right, but when you actually analyze the assertions TOA makes, you find this complex psychological prism.
He's taking these highly specific clinical experiences and using them to reflect on much broader themes, you know?
Yes, like the mechanics of neurodivergence, or those universal nighttime anxieties that you and I and everyone else experience.
The 2 a.m. ceiling stare.
Exactly. And also the way profound personal trauma reshapes our identity.
So let's start with that initial dichotomy, because it really feels like the entry point to everything else he discusses.
The disappointment versus the suddenly lighter heart.
Right, because I think society generally programs us to expect that first reaction.
Oh, absolutely. You get a disease name, and that automatically means something is broken.
Right, it's supposed to be bad news. Nobody throws a party when they get a diagnosis.
Well, we really have to look at the underlying sociology of labeling to understand why that disappointment is the default.
Okay, unpack that a bit. What do you mean by the sociology of labeling?
Well, in medicine, a label serves a function, right? Yeah. But in psychiatry and neurodevelopment, a label is very much a double-edged sword.
Because it's tied to who you are, not just a virus you caught.
Exactly. To receive a label is to be formally told by an authority figure that you deviate from the statistical norm.
You are officially outside the box.
Right. And for the person feeling disappointment, the label is perceived as the final confirmation of a fundamental flaw.
So they hear developmental disorder, and their brain just hyper-fixates on the word disorder.
Yes. The implication there is that order has been lost, that they are inherently disordered.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It is. The distress isn't necessarily about the neurobiology itself, you know. The disappointment stems heavily from the stigma.
Because we live in a world built for a very specific, narrow bandwidth of neurotypical functioning.
Precisely. So when someone receives this diagnosis, they are mourning the friction-free life they assumed they were supposed to have.
Oh, wow. Mourning a friction-free life. That's a powerful way to put it.
They're anticipating the prejudice they might face. The label feels like an ending to them. It feels like a door slamming shut.
But then you have the second reaction, which is really the crux of Tiome's argument here.
Right. The people whose hearts feel suddenly lighter.
Yeah. So if the label is a door slamming shut for that first group, what is it for the second group?
It's an absolution.
An absolution, like forgiveness.
Yes. Think about the internal experience of someone who has struggled for decades without a framework for why they are struggling.
Just constantly feeling like everything is harder than it should be.
Exactly. They are dropping the ball on executive function tasks. They are missing subtle social cues.
Or they're experiencing sensory overload in environments that seem completely benign to everyone else, like a grocery store.
Right. And when you experience that friction every single day, and you don't have a medical vocabulary to explain it,
how do you process it?
you internalize it as a moral failing.
Oh, man. You tell yourself, I'm lazy, I'm careless, I'm just not trying hard enough.
Exactly. The internal monologue becomes incredibly punitive.
You become your own worst bully.
You really do. So when the diagnosis finally arrives, it acts as a circuit breaker for all that guilt.
The lightness is the profound relief of validation.
Yes. Suddenly, the struggles are no longer a moral failing or a lack of character.
They are a direct result of operating with a differently wired brain in a world that wasn't built for it.
Right.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. It's like spending your whole life trying to run a gas engine on diesel fuel.
Oh, I like this. Go on.
So you're pouring diesel into the tank, the engine is sputtering, it's stalling at intersections, and you are just beating your head against the steering wheel.
Feeling like the worst driver on the planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're kicking the tires, blaming yourself, but then you finally take it to a mechanic, which would be the psychiatrist in this scenario.
And they look under the hood.
Yeah, they look under the hood and say, well, yeah, this is a diesel engine.
That changes the entire paradigm right there.
Right, because the engine isn't broken at all.
It's actually a perfectly functional, perhaps highly efficient engine.
You just finally have the correct operating manual. You just needed a different type of fuel.
And that shift in perspective, that sudden realization, is precisely why psychiatrists, why, urges individuals to focus on something else before the disease name.
So he wants you to look past the label first.
He's asking the patient to look at their historical struggles, the years of sputtering and stalling, and reframe them using this new manual.
Because the disease name itself is really just ink on a medical chart.
Exactly. The real work, the thing you have to focus on first, is the cultivation of self-compassion.
Okay, I actually have to stop you there, though, because I see a massive contradiction here.
Oh, what's the contradiction?
Well, we are talking about minimizing the label, right? About not letting the disease name be the focal point of your life.
Right.
But practically speaking, how does an individual actually accomplish that when the external world is obsessively focused on categorizing them by that exact label?
I see what you mean.
Like, you want accommodations at work. You need the label. You need insurance to cover your therapy. You need the label.
It's the currency of the medical system.
Exactly. The world demands the disease name before it offers you any help. So how do we internally minimize something that society externally maximizes?
That is the critical tension here. You're absolutely right. And resolving it requires us to separate utility from identity.
Utility from identity. Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the external world, the bureaucracies, the insurance companies, the educational systems, they operate entirely on utility.
They need a box to check.
Yes, they require categorization to distribute resources. So you use the label as a tool.
It is the key that unlocks the door to the accommodations you mentioned.
Exactly. But the psychological trap, the real danger, is allowing the tool to become your identity.
So the label is a lever you pull to get what you need, but it's not a mirror you look into to see who you are?
That is the perfect distinction, yes.
Wow, okay.
Because when you look in the mirror and all you see is the label, that is when the disappointment and the crushing weight take over.
You lose your agency at that point.
You become a passive victim of a disorder.
Instead of the driver of the car.
Right. But if you view the label merely as a descriptor of your operating system, to use your diesel engine metaphor, you maintain your agency.
You are still the driver. You just have a much better understanding of the vehicle's maintenance schedule.
Precisely. And what's brilliant about how Tomy structures his writing is that he doesn't quarantine this concept to the clinical realm.
Right. He doesn't just say, this only applies to people with developmental disorders.
No, he takes this highly specific experience of internal friction and bridges it to something wildly universal.
He makes the case that you don't need a formal psychiatric diagnosis to feel completely overwhelmed by your own brain.
The transition he makes in the text is abrupt, but it's highly intentional.
Yeah, he pivots from the clinical diagnosis straight to this bold assertion that everyone has endless worries and anxieties.
He is deliberately dissolving the artificial boundary we tend to build between the diagnosed population and the quote-unquote normal population.
And he paints a scenario that is, honestly, it's almost uncomfortably relatable.
Oh, incredibly so.
He talks about lying in bed, remembering a bad event right before going to sleep, and then being completely unable to fall asleep.
And if you were listening to this right now, you know exactly what he is talking about.
Oh, 100%. It's 2 a.m., you are staring at the ceiling, and your heart rate suddenly spikes.
Because your brain decided to aggressively replay a socially awkward comment you made at a dinner party 4 years ago.
4 years ago, yes. Or you were agonizing over a slightly ambiguous tone in an email your boss sent at 4 p.m.
Said, thanks, Would the period mean they're mad at me?
Exactly. We've all been there. And by placing this incredibly common experience right next to the discussion of developmental disorders, he normalizes the struggle of the human mind.
He is pointing out that the baseline condition of human consciousness involves a significant amount of friction.
We are all wrestling with our own psychology.
And we all seem to do it most intensely in the dark.
Okay, wait, I'm losing the thread here on the why.
The why?
Yeah, why the dark? Why that specific pre-sleep window?
Oh.
Is this just a design flaw in the human brain? Like a glitch?
Not a glitch, no.
Or is the brain deliberately forcing us to process the emotional baggage we actively ignored while we were busy answering emails and commuting during the day?
It's absolutely the latter. And to understand the mechanism, we really have to look at the neuroscience of the pre-sleep window.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay some neuroscience on me.
Throughout your waking day, your brain is heavily engaged in what are known as task-positive networks.
Task-positive networks.
Yes, you are relying on executive function. You are navigating physical space, managing complex social dynamics, executing your job.
Basically just trying not to bump into things and getting your work done.
Right, and to do this, your brain is flooded with constant external stimuli.
So we use the busyness of the day as a shield against our own thoughts.
We do, but it's also a biological necessity.
How so?
The brain has limited processing power, right? So it suppresses unresolved emotional friction to deal with the immediate demands of the physical world.
Oh, that makes sense. If you're dodging traffic, you can't be processing childhood trauma.
Exactly. But then the environment changes. You go home, you lie down, you turn off the lights.
You put away your phone, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And the external stimuli drop to near zero.
And what happens then?
When that happens, the task-positive networks power down,
Right.
and the default mode network, or DMN, powers up.
The DMN. I feel like I've heard of the default mode network in the context of, like, daydreaming or creativity.
It is responsible for that, yes.
Okay.
The DMN is the network associated with self-referential thought, mental time travel,
Mental time travel.
meaning dwelling on the past or projecting into the future, and memory consolidation.
So without the barrage of daytime distractions.
Your mind is left entirely alone in a quiet room with all of its unresolved files.
Oh, wow. So it's like the brain's IT department waiting until all the employees have left the building at night to run the heavy, disruptive software updates.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, yes.
It's the only time there's enough bandwidth to process the data.
Exactly. The brain attempts to process these bad events or unresolved social frictions precisely when we want it to shut down.
Because it finally has the cognitive space to do so.
Right. It's doing its job just at the most inconvenient time possible.
Okay, I followed the logic there. The brain needs quiet time to file the paperwork, but I have a major point of confusion.
What's that?
If the default mode network is just meant to consolidate memories and run updates, why does it always prioritize the negative ones? Like, why am I not lying awake at 2 a.m., vividly remembering that time I parallel parked perfectly on the first try?
Right.
Why is it always the awkward comment, the perceived slight, the anxiety about tomorrow?
That comes down to evolutionary biology. Specifically, the concept of the negativity bias.
Negativity bias, I've heard that term.
Your brain is not designed to make you happy, it is designed to keep you alive.
Okay, I feel like that usually leads to an analogy about running away from predators on the savannah.
It often does, yes.
Which, I have to be honest, never quite tracks for me when I'm stressing about an email formatting error.
Fair enough.
Wait.
Let's avoid the tired predator analogies then. The real threat to early human survival wasn't just wildlife. It was social exclusion.
Because we are a hypersocial species.
Precisely. For the vast majority of human history, your survival depended entirely on your standing within your tribe.
Right, you couldn't survive alone.
If you were ostracized, you lost access to food, shelter, and protection. You died.
So social cohesion was literally a matter of life and death.
It was. Therefore, the brain developed a highly sensitive alarm system for social friction.
Oh, I see where this is going.
A perceived mistake, saying the wrong thing, offending a peer, failing a task was a massive threat to your social standing.
So when the default mode network activates at night,
It scans the day's data for anomalies. It highlights the negative interactions because historically, those were the data points that required immediate behavioral correction.
to ensure you weren't kicked out of the group.
Yes, it's trying to keep you safe.
That is fascinating. So my brain at 2 a.m. isn't broken.
Not at all.
It's functioning exactly as designed, trying to protect my tribal standing.
Exactly.
The problem is that it's applying life or death hardware to a modern environment where an awkward email doesn't actually mean I'm going to starve in the wilderness.
Right, it's a massive overreaction to modern stimuli.
It is highly maladaptive for the modern world.
Extremely maladaptive. And that runaway loop of worry is what two-way Y identifies as the baseline of human suffering.
Okay, so he's diagnosing the human condition, essentially.
He is. But to understand how he proposes we break this loop, we have to examine his credentials.
And you don't mean his medical degree, do you?
No, I don't. The text takes a deeply personal turn here, revealing that psychiatrist 2AY isn't just speaking from a detached clinical standpoint.
He isn't just lecturing from the ivory tower of psychiatric theory.
Far from it. The source details the author's own crucible.
Yeah, it outlines that Tomy navigated intense, profound suffering through 3 major life events.
The text specifically lists them, which is incredibly vulnerable for a medical professional.
It is. It mentions experiencing the process of coming out as gay, suffering the death and bereavement of his partner, and experiencing the onset of severe depression.
When a clinician discloses this level of personal trauma, it invokes the concept of the wounded healer.
The wounded healer, is that like an archetype?
Yes, it's famously explored by Carl Jung. The premise is that the most effective healers are not those who have remained insulated from pain.
But those who have been deeply wounded themselves?
Exactly, because theoretical knowledge is entirely different from lived experience.
Oh, absolutely. Reading about fire is different from being burned.
A psychiatrist who has only studied major depressive disorder in the DSM-5 possesses a cognitive map of the illness.
Which is helpful but limited.
Right. But a psychiatrist who has experienced the biochemical and psychological collapse of depression themselves.
They've survived the actual terrain.
Yes. Their entire clinical approach shifts from distant observation to empathetic recognition.
I want to dig into that terrain a bit because the text makes a very specific, incredible causal link.
What link stood out to you?
It states that it was through this deep suffering that Tomy arrived at his true self.
Yes. Not despite it, but through it.
Exactly. Let's deconstruct the 3 specific traumas mentioned because they aren't just random misfortunes.
No, they seem like structural collapses of different pillars of identity.
Right. They are absolute systemic shocks. So let's look at the first one. Coming out as gay.
In any cultural context, but particularly in environments with rigid traditional expectations, coming out is an immense psychological burden.
It requires navigating societal stigma and potential rejection.
Yes, but on a deeper internal level, it is about the agonizing friction between external expectations and internal reality.
It's the sheer exhaustion of maintaining a socially acceptable mask, right?
It takes so much energy to live a divided life.
To come out is to risk your safety, your relationships, and your societal standing for the sake of not living a lie.
The ambient anxiety required to manage that duality before coming out must be staggering.
It is an environment of constant threat monitoring. You are constantly policing your own behavior.
Which is exhausting. And then we move to the second trauma mentioned, the death of his partner.
Bereavement.
Yes, which is an entirely different category of suffering.
Coming out is a struggle for identity, but the loss of a partner is the destruction of your external world.
The loss of a life partner is perhaps the most profound psychological dislocation a human can endure.
Dislocation, that's a good word for it.
It is not merely the absence of a loved one, it is the obliteration of a shared future.
Because you've planned your whole life around this person.
When you lose a partner, your daily routines, your emotional safety net, your financial assumptions, and your very concept of home are shattered simultaneously.
The grief is absolute. It is the ultimate loss of control.
And it makes complete terrible sense that in the wake of that kind of shattering, the third trauma occurs, the onset of severe depression.
If your internal identity was forged in the fire of coming out and your external world was destroyed by grief.
The structural integrity of the mind just gives out.
Right. It just can't hold up anymore.
Depression, in this context, represents a total psychological collapse.
Yeah.
The mind buckles under the weight of an unendurable reality.
And the insidious nature of depression is that it creates a closed narrative loop.
What do you mean by closed narrative loop?
Like, it lies to you. It tells you that the future is permanently empty, that the pain is inescapable, and that your own existence is devoid of meaning.
Yes, it shuts off the ability to imagine a state of non-suffering.
So we have to ask, why does the article include all this? What does this mean for you, the person reading it, the person lying awake at 2 a.m. or staring at a new medical diagnosis?
It's a vital question.
To me, it establishes absolute trust.
Yes, exactly. Trust.
When Tomy tells a patient to look past the label of a developmental disorder, he isn't offering toxic positivity.
He's not just saying, cheer up, look on the bright side.
No, his advice is born directly from his own survival.
He had to look past the societal labels regarding his sexuality to find his identity.
And he had to look past the overwhelming, suffocating labels of widower or depressed person to find a reason to continue existing.
He had to strip away every single external definition.
And the text suggests that hitting rock bottom, while excruciating, acts as a crucible. It burns away everything that is superficial.
Because when you are navigating the death of the person you love most, or the crushing weight of clinical depression, you don't have the excess energy required to maintain falsehoods or societal masks.
The ego is completely dismantled.
And what remains in the ashes of that dismantling is the authentic self.
The true self the text refers to isn't something you build or achieve, is it?
No, it is what is left over when everything false has been burned away by suffering.
Because Tomy has walked through that fire, his credibility is just unassailable.
When a terrified patient sits in his office, paralyzed by a new diagnosis, Tomy knows exactly what it means to be terrified of a label.
And he knows, from lived experience, that the label is not the end of the narrative.
Which brings us to the actual mechanism of change he proposes.
Right. Having established this tense personal credibility and his deep understanding of both clinical trauma and the universal anxiety that keeps us awake,
He offers a lifeline.
he doesn't just describe the darkness, he provides a tool to navigate it.
Yes, the article highlights the title of his book, published by Diamond Inc., which is framed as an emotional support system.
And the title is Psychiatrist Tomy Teaches, Words That Blow Away Anxiety in 1 Second.
We need to examine that phrasing very carefully.
Yeah.
In 1 second.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because based on everything we've just discussed, complex grief, the biochemical reality of depression, coming to terms with a neurodivergent identity.
These things are not cured in a literal second.
Right. I completely reject the idea that this is some kind of magic spell.
To suggest they are would be scientifically inaccurate and deeply dismissive of human suffering.
You don't just say a specific sequence of words and suddenly your grief evaporates or your executive dysfunction is cured.
No, that's late-night infomercial territory.
Exactly. So what does the 1 second actually mean? What is the real mechanism here?
The 1 second refers to the speed of a paradigm shift.
A paradigm shift. Okay.
Refers to cognitive reframing. While the process of healing, of building new habits or processing grief, takes years.
The actual shift in perspective that makes that healing possible happens instantaneously.
It is a moment of sudden cognitive clarity where the objective data of your life remains exactly the same, but your interpretation of that data is radically transformed.
Okay, I have an analogy for this, and I want to see if it holds up to the psychology you're
I
describing.
love your analogies. Let's hear it.
Do you remember those magic eye optical illusion posters that were everywhere a few decades ago?
The autostereograms, yes.
Okay.
The ones you'd stare at in the mall.
Exactly. The ones
Yeah.
that just look like chaotic repeating static or neon patterns.
Right.
You can stand in front of one of those posters for an hour. You stare at it, you feel frustrated, you feel completely inadequate because everyone around you is saying, oh, look at the sailboat, and all you see is visual noise.
And the harder you try to force it, the more anxious and irritated you get.
Exactly. But then, the moment you relax your focus, the moment your eyes cross in exactly the right way, boom.
The image pops out.
In a fraction of a second, the 3D picture emerges. The depth makes perfect sense, and all the frustration vanishes instantly.
That is a phenomenal conceptualization of cognitive reframing.
Because the ink on the poster didn't change. The physical reality of the paper is identical, but your way of looking at it shifted.
Yes, the circumstances of your life, the medical diagnosis you just received, the trauma of your past, the awkward comment you made at the party 5 years ago, those events are the ink on the poster.
They're fixed in reality. They cannot be altered or erased.
But the words you use to describe those events to yourself can trigger that magic eye shift.
So how do words actually do that? How does a single phrase act as a circuit breaker for that runaway nighttime anxiety?
Well, we have to look at linguistics and the neural pathways of anxiety.
Okay.
Anxiety, particularly the nighttime rumination we discussed earlier, is essentially a runaway narrative loop in the limbic system.
The limbic system, right. The emotional center.
Yes, your amygdala is firing, sensing a threat, and it demands a story to explain the fear. So your brain starts spinning a web of catastrophic what-ifs.
It's a self-sustaining cycle. The fear creates the negative thoughts, and the negative thoughts reinforce the fear.
Precisely. It feeds on itself. To break that cycle, you have to engage the prefrontal cortex, the logical language processing center of the brain.
So you use logic to short-circuit the emotion.
Essentially, yes. A precisely chosen word or a specific piece of reframing advice, like the ones Tomy offers in his book, acts as an interrupt code.
An interrupt.
When you introduce a new, compassionate narrative, it disrupts the limbic loop. You are literally giving the brain a different story to process, which downregulates the amygdala's fear response.
It's like throwing a stick into the spokes of a spinning bicycle wheel.
That's a great visual.
The rumination just physically cannot continue on that same path.
Yes. And this connects beautifully back to the very beginning of our discussion today.
With the diagnosis dichotomy.
Think about the person who feels a suddenly lighter heart upon receiving the developmental disorder diagnosis.
That lightness happens in exactly 1 second.
For 30 years, the narrative loop in their head was, I am broken, I am lazy, I am failing.
That is the visual noise on the poster, the chaotic static.
Then the doctor introduces a new phrase. You have a developmental disorder, your neurobiology is just different. Boom, the paradigm shifts.
The heavy weight of moral failure is blown away in 1 second, replaced by the lightness of understanding.
It all comes full circle.
It really does. The journey from being paralyzed by a medical label to suffering through the universal biological torture of nighttime anxiety to navigating the destruction of the ego through grief. It all culminates in this search for the right perspective.
The search for the words that change the picture.
So, as we synthesize this journey, let's look at what we've really uncovered today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started by dismantling the idea that a disease name has to be a source of disappointment.
We looked at the sociology of labeling and realized that if we separate our internal identity from the external utility of the label, a diagnosis can actually be the ultimate tool for relief.
It becomes the operating manual for your unique engine.
We explored the neuroscience of nighttime anxiety, realizing that staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. isn't a sign of mental fragility.
No, it is the default mode network functioning exactly as evolution designed it to, aggressively scanning for social friction to protect our standing in the tribe.
It's maladaptive for the modern world, sure, but it is a universal biological mechanism, not a personal failing.
And then we witnessed how immense personal suffering, the psychological friction of coming out, the absolute devastation of bereavement, and the biochemical collapse of severe depression did not destroy the author.
Instead, it acted as a crucible, burning away societal expectations and superficial labels to forge a profoundly authentic worldview.
A true self, born from the ashes.
And finally, we learned the mechanics of the 1 second shift.
We learned that whether you are dealing with a formal medical diagnosis, the heavy grief of a lost future, or just standard everyday worry, the objective facts of the situation are just ink on paper.
The lens through which you view your struggle, the narrative you construct using language, ultimately defines your physiological and psychological experience of it.
A single paradigm shift, a cognitive reframing triggered by the right words, can downregulate fear and change everything in an instant.
The power lies entirely in finding the perspective that makes your heart lighter.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question for you to ponder as you go about the rest of your day, or perhaps as you lie in bed tonight waiting for the default mode network to power up.
This is a good one to think about.
If a lifetime of agonizing internal friction or the heavy weight of a complicated medical diagnosis can be completely reframed by finding the right words to trigger a 1 second paradigm shift, what current, stubborn worry in your own life is just waiting for the right word to suddenly make sense?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.